Guys, thank you all for coming. We're about to get started here right now, and I'm really excited for this. All of these people have personal experience because we're all affected by the housing crisis here, and we all have experiences that we need to share, and some of us have experience in how to make changes. And we also know we have an upcoming election. A lot of people's city councils are up, so it's very important that we vote on those things. And I guess without further ado, let's get a round of applause for all the panelists here. So our first question is, everybody tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started here, give your name, pronouns, and all that. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Afro Maria Caraya. I'm 28 years old. I'm currently a mortuary science student at KCKCC. I like darkness and bats and spider webs and all kinds of things like that. I've been in Kansas City, Kansas for about 8 years now. Originally I'm from Atlanta, but I really needed an upgrade. I was expecting just fall. That's better. Okay. That's a little bit.
Hello, my name is Jay Moyer. My pronouns are they and them, and I live in Overland Park. I have been a renter in Overland Park for about 4 years on my own, 5 years maybe on my own, and before that I was in college, and before that I lived with my parents because I was still in school. So I've been renting pretty much my entire adult life out of college, and the cost keeps going up, so I'm definitely affected by that. I also work in LGBTQ advocacy here in the Kansas side, and up in Topeka, so that's a little bit about me.
Hi everyone, my name is Patricia Bordallo de Bidox. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm a leader with KC Tenants. KC Tenants is a citywide tenant union in Kansas City, Missouri. We organize with poor and working class people. We are a base of poor and working class people, mostly tenants, working to bring people closest to the problem. We organize around tenant rights, bringing the people closest to the problem to form a solution around housing issues. My role in the tenant union is co-leading the strategy team and also being a part of the language justice team. We're currently running a campaign to get some good language justice and government practices across the river. Very important. I immigrated to Kansas City when I was 8 years old, Kansas City, Missouri, and I live in Strawberry Hill, just around the block. My experience with housing has been facing housing insecurity because there's no affordable housing. My entire adult life, the first time I experienced housing security was a year ago, and it's changed my life, and everybody deserves having safe, accessible, and truly affordable housing, and that's what our union works to do. Thank you.
Bouncing off of that, I forgot to ask this in the intro, but it was actually a part of the question. What's it been like being a tenant? Like, what's that experience been like for you?
It sucked. It's been a horribly disempowering experience. I mean, Kafkaesque is the word that comes to mind for it, really, because being a tenant necessitates having a landlord, having a power structure that is inherently imbalanced, and ultimately, I think everyone here can relate, but it's almost like feeling like cattle. It's like we're being literally pushed into different zones to benefit people who live hundreds of miles away from us and don't really care about, or for the most part, don't really care about what's going on in our immediate local lives. Disempowering was the word.
So I've rented most of my adult life. And I think I'd say the same. You know, like it's tricky finding the resources to be able to keep yourself afloat. And there's always that fear in the back of your head. Am I going to be able to make it next month? Am I going to be able to pay for my rent and for my food and for if something goes wrong with my car and for gas and all of those things build up. And at the base of that is the most expensive thing usually out of your paycheck is the rent. And it doesn't feel great that one of your most basic needs is tied to an income that at the end of the day may or may not be there. So it's not the greatest feeling on the entire planet.
I want to echo what was said in terms of it being disempowering. In my experience, I've also, it's like I've been at a point where I've had to sacrifice buying food, buying medication, buying even like something that's like nice for myself. It's like there's a lot of sacrifice of like pleasure and joy, safety, health that comes with the way that housing exists in this country. It's inequitable, it's not affordable, and it's harmful. Like I first moved into an apartment. I've lived in just about every district in Kansas City, Missouri, and I now live in Strawberry Hills. So it's like I feel like I've gotten, quite a broad experience of like what housing is throughout the Missouri side. And no matter where I went, I couldn't afford it. My neighbors couldn't afford it. I have people who have just like left the city. And in terms of like how I ended up here, even it's like people who can't afford Kansas City, Missouri slowly start to get displaced and into the other like municipalities in the area, and that causes displacement in those municipalities. So it's just like a ripple effect that just is perpetual harm, and it's not right.
Thank you for that. Going into the issue questions, what do you feel are the most pressing housing challenges currently faced by the community?
That is a broad question. So I guess first I would push back on the wording housing community. I don't think there's a single housing community. I think that different districts, different places, different communities have different needs. That being said, in Kansas City, Kansas, I've noticed that there is a real problem both with the infrastructure and with the overarching system of how people even are getting into housing. There's a lot of discrimination going on. I can confirm that as a trans person. I wouldn't be able to be in a place if I didn't have roommates who could pass as cis. It's not something I can do anymore, and I've seen it literally. I haven't been able to for a while. I've seen it of literally just like housing applications that would go through, or rather, never housing. Like, I think it's funny that we're even saying housing when most of us live in apartments, kind of, because housing is houses, and it's like, that's a pipe dream, like, anyway. I think the most pressing issues are the physical falling apart of the infrastructure in Kansas City. There's a lot of pests. That's a huge problem. And also just the corruption within that we see from landlords and politicians. There's a lot of redlining in Kansas City, so.
I think from my experience, one of the biggest, most obvious problems that we have is that the cost of rent keeps rising, right? And the minimum wage is staying the same. So a lot of us are in jobs and have incomes that don't really fluctuate in terms with how much rent costs. I know that my rent has gone up about $50 each year for the past 3 years. That's $150 more that I'm paying now than when I moved into my apartment. And I've actually taken a pay decrease in the jobs that I've had because that's what pay is expected to be, and the minimum wage in Kansas hasn't changed. So that's one thing. I think another barrier to housing is a lot of the policy that we see being crafted. I can only speak on Johnson County because that's where I'm specifically based out of, but in cities like Overland Park, Prairie Village, Shawnee, we see candidates for political office that are running on these issues that will make it harder for people to move in. In Shawnee specifically, there's this new law that bans co-living, which is roommates. So if one of 4 or more people is not related legally, it's an illegal living situation. And that just disproportionately affects people that rely on other people to move in with them and share that cost of rent. In Prairie Village, for example, we're seeing candidates run for political office who want to stop what's called rezoning, and they want to take over the city council to make it harder for Prairie Village to develop and create more affordable housing. And in Overland Park a couple years ago, we had a mayoral candidate who was just went on record saying multiple times that apartments bring crime to the community, even though apartments are one of the most unfortunately reliable forms of housing for people who are low income. So, we see a lot of these political rhetorics and narratives that get pushed upon us, but also just, the simple fact that housing is expensive and it's getting worse and pay is not getting better.
The rent is too damn high.
Yeah.
That is the most pressing issue for people in general, like not just tenants, because obviously Casey Tenants does work around power bills with tenants, but it's also like homeowners and their property taxes, like what it means when our neighborhoods change and there's nothing that regulates what happens to the people like profiting off of who lives there. It's under regulation and the commodification of housing. When people can profit off of something that we need, can't live without, not just need, housing is a human right. And when people are given a chance, when people have been given a chance to profit off of it, they do nothing but exploit it. It's I think the most pressing issue, and it leads to gentrification, displacement, houselessness, deaths, like actual deaths for people who just choose to either live on the street, have to live on the street, lose out on medication because of rent, lose out on food, domestic abuse is a huge consequence of people not being able to choose the thing that they want from their housing. So I would say the biggest issue is that people are able to profit from it and have just exploited it over and over.
All right, thank you. The next question is, piggybacking off of that, how can our government officials actually affect this issue? What's their role?
Local ordinances preventing rent caps. Local ordinances putting caps on how much you can charge a single person for rent. Ideally, it would be nowhere near as much as we're getting now. I also personally do think that there shouldn't be landlords. I think that could be done on a local level by actively working with communities and with tenants to okay, this is how much needs to be done to maintain this space, pool that money together, and do that instead of having a person who is essentially leeching wealth from people who are literally just living and need to live.
Yeah, I think even on a more simplified scale, piggybacking off of what they were saying, our local elected leaders should be conscious of the situation in their community. If you're running for an office like a city council or a school board or even a state house or senate representative, you should be running to serve the people of that community. And if you're getting into politics in order to protect people who want to raise the cost of rent and want to make it harder for other people to live in your community, then you're going at that position in exactly the wrong direction. So we need to have leaders elected to local offices that are hyper aware of the problems that people in their community are facing, and looking forward to finding solutions to those problems. And I would, personally, I would argue in my own capacity that there are people on the ballot this year that do not care about that. They don't want to look for those solutions. They don't want to look out for the people in their community, no matter who they are. They want people to be underrepresented so they can get elected to that office to do what they want to do, and not be conscious of their community members.
Can you name some of those people on that ballot?
We cannot
No, we can't.
endorse or downgrade candidates, because like nonprofit reasons. But I think that everybody should go out and do their own research on these candidates and make that decision for themselves.
The question was, elected officials, what can they do in order to, can you repeat the question for me?
The question was, what role can our local government officials play in addressing those challenges?
Okay, thank you. I think, so I hear what both people up here have said, what both of you have said. I think not just like serving the people is important. To rephrase, KC Tenants right now, we came out of an election cycle on the Missouri side, and a huge part of the process of building like the platform for KC Tenants Power, which is the C4 side of KC Tenants, was building around a process called co-governance for elected officials. And that means that elected officials don't just like make promises and then like make good on them. They actually build their platforms with the people impacted. So we're talking about, if it's like housing, we're talking about tenants. If it's like healthcare, we're talking about people who are disabled, yada yada, The point of co-governance being that the people most impacted in any issue, so when we're talking about housing, single Black moms, immigrants, refugees, when we're talking about any issue, elected officials shouldn't just make good on promises that they made on the campaign trail. They also should be every step of the way consulting with the people who are impacted in every community that they represent. And it's not just talking with them, it's like, maybe you host a town hall and have like an envisioning session. And then from the envisioning session, you weed out the people who are like hungry to build something. They're impacted and they're ready to see change. You bring them into the conversation and you build something with them and then you implement it. Because without implementation, policy doesn't mean anything. We see that on the Missouri side over and over again, that politicians pass laws that they can't enforce or won't. So I always will like challenge people when they say like with good intentions saying like politicians should serve people. It's like they should work alongside them every step of the way, first day to the last, and then hopefully onwards. Yeah, and it has to be actionable.
Piggybacking off of politicians like not doing their jobs, what are some solutions that have been offered by local government that have actually not been effective at all, have been or detrimental?
I don't know. I don't think any solutions have been offered.
Well, I can speak to what I think people have done that they claim is good, but isn't really good. And I want to take it back to the city of Shawnee and this co-living ordinance. They say that this co-living ban makes the community safer, makes it so that the neighborhoods are quieter and more peaceful, and that because you don't have big groups of people living together, that the neighborhoods won't be as wild or as rowdy. But that's not necessarily true. All that is doing really, again, is making it so that people can't share the cost of the burden of rent. And so, I again would encourage people to look at why some of these policies that people claim are helping are actually getting passed. What is the meat behind them? Why do these people want these to become law so badly. And I think you'll find that, again, like I said earlier, sometimes these people don't really have the community's best interests in their hearts. So,
Man, there's a lot of ineffective things that come out of our government constantly. In regards to housing, I was just talking about enforcement, which I feel, as a leader with KC Tenants, constantly we work really, really beeping hard to, like build a policy with people impacted. We like canvas, so we're like doing the work with the people in our communities to like build the thing and get it like put into policy, and then it doesn't get enforced. A good example is the right to counsel, which gives people who are evicted on the Missouri side, the city provides a lawyer for them, the legal fees for them to like fight that, because beforehand, I don't remember the number exactly, but the people who went to court against the landlord, it was like 99% of them, 99% of them lost their case. No chance. And that number has flipped now that that law has passed, but there's so many people getting evicted, the city can't keep up. So it's like actually, like when policy is built, actually looking at the scale of the situation and making sure that it can happen reasonably, sustainably. There's also like the Housing Trust Fund, which is like a pot of money that KC Tenants was trying to fight for to build social housing. Social housing is what you were saying is Ephraim Maria. What you were saying in terms of like not having landlords, social housing, which exists very successfully around the world. Social housing is decommodified housing that is like owned and run by the people who live in it. It is beautiful. If you look at cities like Vienna, where else? Paraguay, where in Uruguay.
Yeah.
I know Kelly knows.
I mean, all over Europe, really.
Yeah.
There's successful 100-year-old social housing.
If you look up municipal social housing online, there are just like many beautiful models of it that exist. And KC Tenants built a model called the People's Housing Trust Fund, which is a vision for that happening here in Kansas City. What the city did was build a trust fund. It's called the Housing Trust Fund, but it's not the People's Housing Trust Fund. It still sits like ran by a board full of people who have private interests, if I'm being real. We did win 2 seats on that board, which we get, like tenants being on a board is a huge deal when talking about housing issues. But it's not enough. And there's no revenue that keeps that trust fund intact. So it's like, the intent is semi there, but the city tends to just like put one foot in the door and say that's good enough instead of actually driving it home,
They have one place in the 18th and Vine Street area, it's called Parade Park. And it's owned by, but now they're about to be removed out. And there's a whole lot of area there that can be redeveloped. It would be wonderful if KC Tenants kicked in, because a lot of those people are elderly, have no place to go, been there for over 40, 50 years. And there's a lot of areas that are newly developed that can house new people to come in.
Yeah.
So
And
that's just a suggestion.
just to clarify for everybody, she's speaking about Parade Park, which is the first Black-owned cooperative housing in the country. Yeah, which is a huge deal to have in Kansas City. And they are, for a lot of reasons, like, the co-op has fallen into disrepair. Like, essentially people see the solution as people moving out, but a lot of the people who live there don't feel like they have a choice in what's happening right now, and that is the issue, is the, being forced out of homes. But that is a good point. We do have, like, co-ops in Kansas City that have existed for a long time.
Piggybacking off of that, what is the dream or the vision that you see? What do you feel are like potential solutions or things that have been implemented that have benefited the community, or that you feel could benefit the community?
A whole lot of piggybacking. no more cops, no more landlords, no rent, work is optional. I think realistically, all of these things are achievable. And what was the full question?
Full question was, can you share some examples of housing-related projects or initiatives that have had a positive impact on your community, or things that you would feel have a positive impact on your community?
Oh, of course. Okay, well, yeah. Rent caps, I think, would be a blessing to everyone. I also think that there's a lot of land that we aren't using collectively in a lot of our, different apartments and different housing situations. I think community gardens, more green spaces, more playgrounds even, or just like parks would be, I think, beneficial to everyone's mental health, if nothing else, and physical health in a lot of cases. And also having those like locally run community gardens, creating that commitment, creating that sense of community. I think in a lot of housing situations, you have people who live very, very close together and don't know each other at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I actually do think that is a huge problem that we're facing and I believe that it's encouraged by a lot of politicians because it benefits them. Not all, but I think a lot benefit from alienation and people being isolated despite being so close together. And I think being able to develop that land and actually find ways to live off of it and sustain life from that land, not just the plant's life, but then if you're, growing succulents or vegetables or fruits or whatever, whoa, you can eat those things too and they can sustain you. It's fun like that. So that's just some of my ideas.
So you asked what the dream was, and I think this is a very deep-rooted issue, right? Housing is a necessity for every single person, just to have a roof over your head, have access to clean water. So I think we start there. We start talking about how do we make sure that every single person has a roof over their head, no matter what. That's number one. How do we make sure every single person has access to food, clean clothes, clean water? That's part of number two. Just those types of things that, like, as it's coming out of my mouth, I'm like, that should be like a duh for everyone, that should be like something that everyone has. Like, I wish that we lived in a world that everyone had that. But in order to get there, we need to look at some of the other problems that are preventing that, right? Kansas City has a really, really bad problem with redlining. Even though those lines went away, the money still hasn't moved around, communities haven't been invested in, people haven't had the opportunities to get some of these things like housing and food. We need to look at mental health. We need to ask ourselves why people don't have access to mental health so they can stay in a housing situation where they have access to that and don't need to rely upon certain things to move there. So, we should be looking at a path towards a society where, like I said before, every single person has access to the most basic things that they need to survive without the fear of having those things getting taken away simply because they had a bad month and all of a sudden they can't afford the rent. Pass it back to you.
Could you repeat the question for me to make sure I answer it in full, please?
Can you share some examples of housing-related projects or initiatives that have had a positive impact on your community, or ones that you think would have a positive impact on your community?
I mean, the ones that I would think would have a positive impact would be social housing, municipal social housing, co-ops, community land trusts. In terms of what has existed that has created a positive impact, I already talked about the Housing Trust Fund, and even though it is not the Housing Trust Fund that fully works for the people, I do feel as though, like it has created material change that is good for people in Kansas City. There was an incredible like shutdown of like this incentive request from a developer, like $1 billion developer from Chicago called Mac Properties, and Midtown Tenants Union, which is a union within KC Tenants, they fought it and shut it down, and it took how many millions of dollars, Wilson? Sorry.
It's like $20 million.
$20 million that of our public money that a private developer wanted to take to build housing that people in that community could not afford. Like Wilson herself was displaced from that neighborhood, grew up in it, was displaced from it, and it's like taking the housing trust fund has been able to like get money through those things getting like shut down. It's not the housing trust fund we need, but it has created change that is positive. The Tenant Bill of Rights, KC Tenants' like first big fight was establishing or passing a policy around tenants' rights, and it gives tenants the right to organize, which means you can't get evicted if you choose to join your tenant union, which is obviously huge for us. It provides protection around gender identity, sexuality, race. It's rights for people who are already in a spot where they're constantly being exploited and treated unfairly. So that's got to be one of the biggest like positive changes that we have seen in Kansas City. We are working to get source of income discrimination passed this year, which is something that got taken off the Tenant Bill of Rights when it first got passed in 2019, which is a huge blow to single Black moms, people most affected by housing insecurity. So those are a couple examples of positive changes we've seen.
Yeah, okay, so I have a few more things to add. One, I'm surprised I forgot to mention the lead pipes. Kansas has boil warnings all the time. Like, literally, we need to actually focus on that's kind of what I meant by infrastructure, is things like that are, it's like a human right wrapped up in a human right, and both of those human rights are being violated at the same time. It's kind of crazy. Some projects that I have heard of, my church has a initiative from one of its justice committees for pallet houses, which aren't literally made out of pallets, but they're kind of like, that's what it is, and it's like they have heating, they have water, but they're kind of temporary housing that is constructed quickly, sturdily, but isn't designed to be forever. My church is kind of working on that as like a way to house people over winters or particularly harsh summers. And I think that's not a good solution long term, but for where we are right now, I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. I think we need it. Another solution, another housing thing that I just wanted to mention really quick is when I mentioned no cops before, I did mean that literally. Having less regulation to allow people to do things. People like, I don't know if anyone here has ever heard of Slab City or a place like Bombay Beach, but generally people will find ways to survive if given enough time on their own. Those tent cities can become cities if you let people do that. A big problem is that there has been so much regulation and so much policing of homeless people that it hasn't been allowed to happen ever. But we know, I mean, historically, you can look at like when people live in a place long enough, they develop it. The Kowloon walled city was, sorry.
No, when you're done, keep going.
I was just gonna start mentioning like just different communes, different like things, but the point is that people are, we are our greatest resource, I guess.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I actually want to talk about the 10 cities for a second, because so the first time, we don't have a lot of those in Johnson County. So the first time I was like really ever exposed to one and I saw one was on a trip to Denver in 2020. And my eyes were pretty opened by what I saw because like my first morning there was a group of police officers that went into this massive commune of unhoused people living in tents just south of the Colorado State House in Denver. And they pulled these people out of their tents, didn't even give them a chance to collect their belongings and their things, started basically bulldozing them, and these are the only belongings that these people have. These are their only protection from the outside world, the cold, or the heat, or what have you. And I just couldn't help but think that like the way that we are policing existence is a little insane to me. Like the fact that we have the ability to tell another human being that is doing everything that they can to survive that they are illegal just for existing is absolutely insane to me. And then I came back home and realized that's a problem in Kansas City too. Like that happens in Kansas City where people get displaced and unhoused and separated from the only worldly possessions that they have just simply because it doesn't look nice to other people as they drive down the street. So we need to move away from that. We need to move away from looking at other people like they're a problem and finding ways to help them so that they can live the way that they can live the best.
okay, 2 more points. In your first point, you mentioned mental health. I just want to mention something that I think is being done well, in my own experience. In Wyandotte County, there's the Wyandotte County Behavioral Health Network, or the Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network. They're pretty good. They offer low income and sliding scale and very like low cost therapy services, access to different, psychiatrists, as well as just different programs socially. Like I think the art program that they have going on is really astounding. And I forgot the other thing.
Well, if you can remember it, you can ask it again. I know briefly or multiple times throughout this conversation.
I remember it.
You remember it? Okay.
I remembered it. Okay. This isn't Kansas City, Kansas. This is Kansas City, Missouri. But I think it was some. I'm not allowed to curse, am I?
Ferris? Yeah.
It's some fuck shit. It's some fuck shit is the only way I can describe it, really, because that's what it is. It's not something that I would use elegant, non-curse words for. It is fuck shit. Last year there was this program called the Heart Cart.
Okay.
Yeah. They literally gave homeless people trash cans and told them to put their stuff in it and roll it around the city. Like, and the thing is that from a practical level, it's like, oh wow, you're offering a decent solution from a practical level, but it's absolute fuck shit from any perspective of like humanity. Like, why are you telling this person to put their life in a trash can? That's what you're telling. That's what I got from. Because it's like, yeah, we're telling people they are literal trash. You're filth. We don't want you here. Put you in a dumpster.
Do you know who did that?
It was the council.
It was like, yeah.
The worst
The
part
city
about that was
council?
they rolled it out like it was gonna be really great.
Oh yeah, Quentin Lucas was there at the like big unveiling for it, grinning super big like he was doing something crazy. But it's like, I spoke to one of the members of the council about it, and I remember asking directly like, why don't we just take some of the empty houses in the Kansas City, Kansas metro area and start giving those to people? And he said to me that that would be too expensive.
I was on that board part, it really was, because they had let those houses run down
Mm.
so low that if we came in there and developed it, they wasn't giving us no funds to develop it, for one. Not only were they not giving us funds, we would have to borrow the money so we borrowed $70,000 to fix us up, because a lot of them from the plumbing on up need to be redone.
Yeah.
And put $70,000, then we have a mortgage on it, right? We couldn't give it back to you for a reasonable cost. So even if they gave the house to us for $1. So we, cause I am a landlord and I like to listen. So we knocked that whole ideal out. If you can't give us funding, or at least give us a loan at a reasonable percentage rate to pay back, it was useless. So that's why I got knocked out. It wasn't it really was too expensive.
Something that I can say, from what I've read, is that not dealing with the housing situation can cause the government to waste more money because of the cost that we don't think about that comes from it. If you're unhoused and we're policing that, that costs money. If we're throwing people in jail, that costs money. If people are sacrificing like their meds to pay for their rent, and they're having like mental health crises and they're taking up mental health services, that costs money. So,
And to that point, how much money do you think it costs to open these warming centers every winter? How much money do you think it costs to bring food to those places? I mean, unless you can get it with volunteers and with, donations, and that's great. How effective are they at keeping people off the streets? How effective are they at actually bringing people comfort? And how many seasons do you have to do them before those people can actually find reliable housing and permanent accesses to things like food and clean water? Why are we offering Band-Aid solutions to issues that need real results?
You wanna answer that?
I wish I had. I think she does.
where are we at on time?
It's 6:57.
Okay, so 6:57. Be thinking about the questions you want to ask, because we're getting really, really close to Q&A, like 3 minutes away. But there are a couple more questions that I wanted to ask. Discrimination is something that's been brought up quite a bit during this conversation, and the question for it is, what types of discrimination are prevalent in housing, and what are some potential ways to make it more equitable?
There's tons of discrimination in housing, in the country as a whole, but housing especially, like people, for just about every decision that they can make in their life, there's a way in which housing can be, it can affect the way that they access housing, right? Where you work, source of income discrimination, like I mentioned, is something that KC Tenants is working to, a ban on source of income discrimination is what we're working to pass this year. And that means that no matter where you get your paycheck, your money, whatever that looks like, you cannot be denied housing. If you have served at a restaurant and try to apply for housing and you get tips, you have a hard time finding housing. Most of my server friends make a lot of money and they can't get housing because some of them don't, but it's you can get a lot of sufficient money and tips to cover your rent, and you are still not able to access it. People with vouchers, Section 8 vouchers for low income housing, people get, they're given this assistance, and landlords are able to say, I don't want to rent to you because you're a liability. You don't deserve to live here. There's neighbors who don't want people with vouchers in their buildings. That's a huge issue. Immigrants, a lot of times, can't even read their lease because landlords are not required to translate it. People can be denied housing because they're trans, because they're of a certain race. There are so many ways in which people, because I talked about passing the Tenant Bill of Rights, but I also talked about lack of enforcement, right? So many people don't even know that the Tenant Bill of Rights exists, even though landlords are required to give tenants a copy of it whenever they rent. And people just like will be discriminated against and they don't even know that there are protections for it, let alone if they know that there are protections for it, is there enforcement whenever their rights are violated? That's the beauty of like our tenant union, KC Tenants, like whenever people are hurting and we know that there's a way to like build power around it and change our circumstances, we do it. But a lot of people go without knowing that that's like an option. I'm trying to think if there's something I missed in terms of discrimination. There's
Yeah, I mean, I know you could
lots.
literally talk
Yeah.
forever about discrimination because it's so prevalent.
So, I'm an LGBTQ activist who goes to Topeka quite a bit. I'd like to talk about it for a second. If you think that this legislature is doing anything about housing in Kansas, I mean, it is still legal in state statute in Kansas to deny someone housing on the basis of your sexual orientation or gender identity. I mean, you literally can. There are no protections. The Kansas Act Against Discrimination does not cover sexuality and gender orientation. The state, certain lawmakers in Topeka won't talk about it. Instead, we are focused in Kansas on banning certain types of people from playing sports, getting access to health care, and identifying the way that they want to identify. We are focused on destroying our public education system by trying to place public dollars in private schools. We are focused on so many things that will be a detriment to everyday people, especially Black people, other non-white people, LGBTQ people, specifically trans people and trans youth. These demographics are being targeted right now in our government. And the things that may not even be related to housing, so let's talk about education for a second, will indirectly impact a person's ability to receive housing later on. If we cannot uphold our wonderful public schools in Kansas, if teachers flee the state because we don't focus on funding them and funding our public ed, if we cannot fully fund special education, which will disproportionately impact another demographic, then those people later on will not get a good education. And that's just the facts. And if they aren't able to get a good education from an early age, they will not be able to move on and become a successful, full-rounded adult and find housing and have the resources they need to get that housing. So instead of focusing on targeting certain groups and destroying public education, our legislature needs to get back to working for everyday Kansans and focus on issues like housing. That's what I gotta say about that.
And that's all period. I also, I don't think I you mentioned disability, but physical disability is a huge barrier for a lot of people physically who cannot access certain spaces, certain apartments. You have 2-story, 3-story apartments. I live in an apartment that doesn't have any wheelchair accessible entrances at all, which I'm pretty sure is illegal, but maybe not. I don't know. Kansas law. It's probably encouraged.
I don't know about that.
But yeah, there's discrimination based on physical ability. Just like they mentioned, there's discrimination based on where you work from. Good luck telling your landlord that you're a sex worker. There's also a lot I've found of discrimination, not just based on where you get your work from, but how you get to work, which is to say, like, the intersection of housing and public transit. It is in crisis in Kansas City, I think, yeah. So, those are.
Moving into some action questions, how can tenants be educated about their rights? And you don't have to answer every question, by the way.
Talk to the
If you-
teacher.
If you know the answer and you're best suited for it, you can answer.
You organize. I so much of what just about everything that I'm sharing today is I learned because I decided to join the tenant union in Kansas City. And it shouldn't be just up to people like joining a tenant union. Like really the government should do, like I said, the Tenant Bill of Rights, like the government and landlords are supposed to like tell people that they have rights so that they know what they are whenever they're not, being respected or if they're being violated. So there's responsibility on the government side as well as like housing providers, whatever that looks like. But to me, it's like, yeah, it has to be people, showing up partly. Organizing to me with neighbors is like the way that you know your rights and make sure that they're being respected.
I know you said we don't have to answer every question,
Okay.
but so showing up to this is a great start. Thank you, Zoom people as well. Educating yourself on what's going on in the community, educating yourself on your local government, who is there, what are they fighting for, what are they focusing on. But also, I wanted to bring it back to the very beginning before this panel even started, and Efren was kind of talking to us about, I want this to just be a conversation, because all three of us up here were like, we're not experts on this. Like, we don't really know what we're talking about necessarily, even though we all have experiences, right? And that's what we've been talking to all day long. And guess what? You all either live in a home or don't live in a home, and you can speak to it too, right? So talk to the people in your community, do that relational organizing. Talk about how it affects you and why it's important and why you came to forum like this today and why you're paying attention online and why we need to be having more conversations about this. Because the more you talk about it, the more people will realize that it is an issue and the more they will also talk about it and they will advocate for what will really help people when it comes to these issues.
Alright, I think we're gonna move into Q&A now. Oh,
Okay,
did
real
you
quick
have-
though, before y'all ask a question, just will you please introduce yourself for our people online so they know who you are?
Yes, please do that. But yeah, if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and I'll call on you.
Or just shout it.
Yeah, that works too.
I have a really little bitty basic question. You mentioned, my name is Kelly Allen.
There we go.
I work on the Missouri side in the Lichens Neighborhood Association, and I've done some organizing with Casey Timmons as well. I feel like the neighborhood that I serve has a lot of similarities to KCK. It's one of the reasons why I was here, especially when it comes to like cultural and language barriers and competency of like the government to cater to those things. When you get something like a boil order in KCK, does it only come to you in English? Does it come only via text? Like, how did they really make it clear that you need to boil your water?
They don't.
You don't.
I've not seen any in Spanish or anything. But yeah, there's a huge problem with like I think the Kansas City, like the KCK unified government is trying to like push everything into like the text zone, online, smartphone zone. So, but they're doing that in a very messy way. So,
Same.
I had to be told that we got boil warnings before I started like looking for them online.
To that point, if you are struggling with being unhoused, yet the only communication system that the government has to warn you about a boil advisory is through a smartphone that can potentially cost up to $1,000 or more. Which is going to come first? To another point, I think there was just a boil advisory last week, am I right? Something like that?
Scared.
We have them a lot in Casey too.
The fact that my friend who works in Kansas City, Missouri does not know that, but myself who lives in Overland Park knows that, it's a little concerning to me. I got it through KCTV5 News because I get the updates on my phone. Those are not in Spanish. You have to be opted into those. You have to have the app downloaded. You have to have service, and you have to have a smartphone. It's a lot of hoops to get through. So I will just say, bless you, Johnson County, for taking care of us, but I wish my friends in KCK and KCMO had the same resources.
Hi, my name is Amaris. Kind of like my question is, you guys talk about like bringing the community together, but a lot of us here in the KCK area, mainly like thinking Wyandotte, which is where I'm from, we're a lot of working class people. We also have like a lot of the language barriers. Some like advice in like reaching those kind of things of like creating more availability maybe for like these kind of, not necessarily forums, but more like information for these people, and also just providing them more in Spanish primarily for my community.
Waiko, I think that for Wyandotte County specifically, a big thing that we need are more, I don't know, like you said, accessible events. Like, KCK needs to acknowledge that it's a bilingual city, and that it needs to be, that everything needs to have, if not a thing in Spanish, also a thing in Braille, personally. Like, I don't know, maybe I just grew up bougie, but like, I remember sometimes I'd see signs and they'd have little Braille things under them, and now I don't see those anymore anywhere, and I guess like, all the blind people just went somewhere or something. Even though there's a school for the, right there, yeah, like, so, that, I think the thing that's coming to my mind is like, we need more block parties. That's just genuinely where I go, is like, that's a good thing that we don't really do anymore, but like would probably, yeah, really help the community actually connect and have people actually, you see less of the things that you don't want to see if people in a space generally like each other.
To answer your question, so KC Tenants is multiracial, multi-generational, anti-racist, and we always say we organize across all lines used to divide us. When you talk about like race, class, gender, anything that is, issues that poor and working class people live with, there are more similarities with our neighbors always than there are differences. And if people want, like you're saying, like how do you actually like bring people together? It's like actually just building relationships. Like the people look at KC Tenants and they're like, people have a lot of feelings about our work, but we're like fucking effective. I censored myself earlier and I've never done that, so I'm throwing mine in. But like our work, we get shit done, and we do it well. And people constantly are like, like what's in the water at KC Tenants, and it's literally building relationships with one another. Knowing that shit is gonna be hard. There's people that, there's people in our base who are like 70-year-old black women who were born and raised here. I'm an immigrant. I moved here from Mexico when I was little, grew up in the north end of Kansas City, Missouri, have lived everywhere. Kelly's and, Christina. There's so many people organizing to like do the thing that we need to do in order to live better lives. And I think as soon as you identify what the common interest is and say, I want to invest in my neighbors, it just like comes together after that. And being able to like lean into tension, knowing that when things get difficult, you have to like trust in your neighbors and your comrades to have your best interest of like individually and the collective in mind in order to like get the thing done. It can happen. It's hard, but it is happening in our union. So you should come to a meeting.
And also, when you see something like this, replicate it in another language. Just decide to be like, help me host this in Spanish. I want to do this night in Spanish. There's times that you can just recreate these situations, but make it accessible to a different group.
I totally forgot the language aspect of your question, which is is something that we are literally within the last year at KC Tenants, we looked around and we were like, immigrants and refugees are highly impacted by housing injustice. And we don't have a lot of immigrants in our base. We had a fight in February helping refugees fight a mass eviction, and we won it. And it was kind of a reckoning moment of people, some people aren't in our base, and we need them to be. And when we talk about building with the people most impacted, we were like, oh, whoa, we actually need to bring. Me as an immigrant, I was like, why are there not more immigrants in our base? And we looked around. That was a tension on my end. I was like, wait a second, why is there only 3 immigrants in a group of thousands, right? Not thousands, hundreds of leaders. And we are now we formed a language justice team because of that. We were like, we need people. Yeah, when we did the North Lawn fight in the Northeast, which is what I'm referencing with the refugees, we interpreted to Spanish and Burmese, and it was hard. It was so freaking hard. I interpreted some stuff, and I'm not a trained interpreter. We had a couple of trained interpreters, but it's they're short on time, high in demand. It takes a lot of effort, but it is worth it when if you recognize that people are being left out of the conversation because of something like language, it is worth the fight to change it. I can't believe I forgot that part.
Do you want to flip a coin? I got it first.
Yeah, he can go ahead and then I'll go after
I have
him.
a comment on that. Got to realize where these people come from. They don't have community organizations the same as we do. They'll have it in their same language, but they're not used to in their own communities crossing to other languages and so on. As a matter of fact, in parts of the world where they come from, they're very discriminatory. So they don't know to do what you're saying. It's out of their reach. They don't even think they can come to you and talk about it. They don't even think about it. It's not even in their heads. So if you're going to discuss it with these people, you have to introduce them to the concept. And it's going to take a bit to get through because they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. And it's just for you to tell them that there's something exists and that they need to do something or show some effort to invest their time. It's just almost going to be impossible. It's going to be extremely hard. They're younger people in the group, in their organization, in their community will have to relay that and try to get the people involved. But see, they have no idea what the outcome would be. If they invest their time, do they see any results? Is it that much? Do they really feel that if they invest their time and do their thing, is there some kind of results they can get? Because they have no history of seeing that happen. So trying to get this across to different cultures is going to be difficult.
Yeah, I do feel there's a pretty broad generalization there. As an immigrant, I feel as though the biggest issue is that immigrants are constantly targeted and there's no trust. I think people in immigrant and refugee communities want to reach across, but there's a lot of harm that's being caused to their communities by the government, by their own communities. So I feel it's less so about do they want to or not, but how can we as the people who want to bring them in because they're part of our community, how do we actually do that in a way that builds trust with them and not just expects them to show up, do the work, and then go out back into the world, I guess.
Well, if I can speak to that for a second, I'm not an immigrant, but I watch the way that our government talks about immigrants, both at the state and the federal level. And I don't think it can be a question in anyone's minds that they don't necessarily not know what to do, but they probably feel extremely disenfranchised by our government. And honestly, thank God for groups like KC Tenants because they're out there doing the work and using their voices every day and showing that it can be done. And not that every situation is this way, but if you build it, they will come, right? We have a government that's actively talking about building a literal physical wall in between the borders of two countries, and they call people who come across that wall illegal. If I were someone who was trying to cross that border to a country to find a new life and a better opportunity for myself, only to have that be the situation I walk into, of course I would feel disenfranchised enough to become disengaged and disconnected. So we need to start talking about that. We need to start addressing that and making sure that people know that they are welcome here and they do have that opportunity here. And all we gotta do is reach out and let them know what's available and let them know that they do have that power.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. I just want to say this off the heart. America is a melting pot. I don't like the word immigrant. I personally don't like that word. And I'm Black. You're not being treated no different than we are, and we're from here. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And I just don't like that word because majority of people there in America came from somewhere else, whether it's Europe, whether it's Ireland, whether it's Greece. They are not indigenous to this land. So that would be how I would approach it. And I am the vice president of Parkwood neighborhood, in which we are getting a large group of minorities from Mexico coming up. We're getting refugees that I just came from Catholic Charities. They are bringing over 50 refugees with families of 6 to 7. So if anybody knows anything about need housing, have any houses available, they're looking for 3 and 4 bedrooms to house these people. But that's the only thing I want to say that. But I wanted to address the fact of, I wanted to ask a question. What do you call social housing? And what is the difference in your mindset of social housing rent? Because Parade Park is a ownership, which is different. So social housing and the difference between projects. Because my idea of projects was not a positive point of view. So what is your idea? So I can understand that.
I'm gonna read you word for word what social housing is. This is like what, we've shaped as, actually, this was based on a team that existed within KC Tenants that was called the social housing team. That work has shifted, but what came out of it was determining like what does that actually look like. It's not set in stone until it is a thing, but social housing is publicly backed. That means both in support and money, the public funds it. Like instead of putting our public dollars towards a development on Main and Armour that is privately built by a company in Chicago, that money goes towards like housing that the city owns.
So like
the people own.
Like HUD.
I don't know if I would say like HUD because we're talking about like the people of the city instead of like
That's a big
an entity, right?
That's a big difference.
Yes. Democratically run, it means the people who live in it make the decisions around it. So when we were talking about Vienna, I went like hard into like researching social housing in Vienna last year. There's buildings that, have like a community garden because people that are living there are seniors, and they had a say in saying like when our housing is built, like this is what we would like to see. In Uruguay, in Fucbam, that housing project, people like literally determine if they have children, is there going to be like, a childcare facility in the like building that they're building together. Democratically run means people have a say in what it looks like instead of, God, as an artist, like I just had this conversation where people always think that artists want like studio apartments so that their studios are in their living situation. No artist wants that. Like people don't talk to the people who they're claiming to like build something for when it comes to housing. So yeah, democratically runs means people have an agency in like how it's built, how it's like run. If the AC needs to be replaced, like people decide when it gets to be replaced instead of like waiting for somebody to do it. And the last thing, it's accessible to all. Everybody is housed in the city. There's nobody that's left out of it. It doesn't matter if they have a job, doesn't matter if they want to have a job. Like people have housing because it's a right. So that's our definition of social housing.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Hi y'all, I'm Haley. I'm back here. I'm a volunteer with Loud Light tonight. First of all, wonderful job to all of you panelists. I've been really impressed with all of your answers and just the clarity, and I really appreciated that. My question has to do with how do we get more people into this room? Housing is not a new issue. It's been going on for years and years and generations, and a very long time, where people are living in unsafe, unaffordable housing and have all of these other issues that come with it. How do we motivate the people that are most disenfranchised, the people that aren't motivated to show up to the table? What tips and tricks or ideas do you have to have those conversations to motivate more people to come to things like these?
Yeah, I can start. Community organizing is not a quick thing. It takes time to talk to people about these things and to get them to the table. There's a reason all of you are in the room tonight, and I bet you if you went home and texted one or two of your friends, said, I went to this great housing panel and I think you should watch it on Facebook, and I think you should share it and let everyone know what was discussed because I really appreciated what was said. That right there can change hearts and minds and empower people to start talking about it. Another thing is just making sure that this is always a topic of discussion. I know this is an absolutely different topic, and whoever's in the room may stand on different sides of it, but I realized at one point during the August 2nd vote last year, on the vote yes or vote no, wherever you stood on that issue, that the only reason we were having those conversations, the only reason people were sharing their personal healthcare stories was because lawmakers were controlling that narrative about what we should be talking about, what we should be focusing on, what types of things are being decided about people's lives. And so we need to make sure that we are taking back the narrative, no matter what it is, specifically on housing. I think it's important that we do make the conversation about that. Every time someone talks to you about politics or anything political, hey, do you know where we're at with housing right now? Google is my favorite thing on the planet. So maybe Google, what are the housing laws in Kansas City, Kansas? What are specific housing laws in Kansas City, Missouri? The next time you have a chance to talk on it, do, right? Tell your friends, I just learned this, and I'm not okay with this, and maybe we should go to our next city council meeting and speak on it. Or maybe we should find the information for our state lawmaker and speak on it. That type of thing, getting people invested in having that conversation and actively moving that needle and talking about it to make sure that it's constantly on people's minds.
I agree. Talking about it is really important. Making sure the conversation is continuing and that, people hear about it. There has to be press about a thing if you're going to have anyone show up. My answer, though, was probably one that's a little bit more simple. For something like this, I think food. More people would show up if there was donuts or something. I mean, that's imagine this is probably, I've seen AA rooms triple this full, and it's there's donuts there, that's why they're showing up. I'll be sober for some donuts. And I'm willing to bet for some donuts you could probably get more people to care about housing. Especially since they probably have some kind of relationship to housing, and then they get donuts.
No need to reinvent the wheel, right?
I think that's actually a pretty good point, and I'll use my own experience joining Basic Tenants as an example because I have followed Casey Tenants like pretty intensely since it launched. And I just like had other stuff going on in my life where I was like justifying like I just like can't get involved. I went, followed online, went to my first like Casey Tenants like rally in June of 2021. And it was like amazing. There was like 500 people there, just incredible energy. We danced, we ate, like it was just like best vibe. And I still walked away being like, I'm not, not ready to join. And a couple months later, there was a direct action at City Hall. It was my first time ever going into City Hall as a person who can't vote, like was a place I never intended to step foot in. But for some reason, I was like, I want to go to this direct action. And it was nuts. Like we occupied the mayor's office. Like it was a really intense action. Lots of tension, discomfort, anger, like people, there was also like beautiful singing. Like there was moments where like our older leaders were like leading us in song. There was like leaders leading us in chants. It was beautiful and powerful. And as complicated as that like whole situation was, like the direct action was, that was the thing that I was like the next day I was in Janae Manley's house, she's an organizer with Casey Tenants, the best of the best. I was in her living room like the next day and I was like, let's go. Like that was the thing that got me to join. And some people come in through like you're saying, it's like maybe there was like barbecues that I'd gone to for Casey Tenants that people like, it is just kind of like meeting people where they're at, knowing that not everybody's going to be comfortable with a direct action, but they might be great at comms. Some people might, never canvass a door, but they might do phone banking. Getting people to show up isn't like a one answer thing. It's like actually just like reaching across and saying like, we're here. I would say like canvassing and like talking to our neighbors is like the best way, but people do need all sorts of access points in order to feel it. I'm really thankful that I found that in Casey Tenants.
Yeah, clap for that. Wrapping up our conversation, I want to make sure we all take something away from this. One of the most important things that my supervisor just texted me, she was like, make sure you tell people that today is the last day to register to vote. So if you're not, I may be speaking to the choir here because if you're here, you probably are already registered. But the election's going to be on November 7th. Vote for your city council members.
In Kansas.
Yes, in Kansas.
KSVotes.org.
KSVotes.org. Yeah, go do that.
If you're in Missouri, the election has already happened.
But also there are other things that you can do besides voting and getting your neighbor to vote. You would be surprised how many decisions are made on the local level by some 90-year-old man coming in there and showing up every single day. So you can get your friends, you can gather them, you can join one of these organizations or the organizations in your area. And we do make a difference. We'll be reaching out to the community, we'll be canvassing, and we'll be having sessions where we like go in and show up to these city council and tell them, these are the things we care about, you need to implement them, and like stop listening to people that are saying that affordable housing is not something that's important. I think, did you want to add one last thing? It's a brief, okay.
In Wyandotte County, the biggest problem of getting affordable housing is the utility, which is BPU, and our taxes. We are giving corporate welfare to the large entities that are coming in. And our water bill and taxes, our light bill and taxes are extremely high. And it's not based off of just the light bill itself. It's all the fees that are added, so you know what I'm talking about, that are added to the bill that are from unified government. I wouldn't want to move here if I can't afford the utilities. I wouldn't want to move here or purchase a house if I can't afford the taxes. So those are the key things in order And you have to address that, and right now they're at the table, huge at the table right now here. So I would love to organize with you all. Y'all done a great job, especially here from the younger people. Thank you so much.
Oh, I mean, rent is generally more expensive than utilities, though. We can still focus on rent, is my little 2 cents at the end there.
We can do both.
Good
But-
job with your, you're leaving your cup.
Sorry, I gotta go.
Thank you all for coming. And we get like one more round of applause for all of our panelists.